Hello, my friends. I think we're making this work. Perfect. Okay. So, I had a pretty bad back today, guys. So, I am going to take time to record our lesson for you guys. Hopefully, it goes all right. I can't necessarily play music from this, unfortunately, because there'll be copyrights because I'm doing this on YouTube. But I would recommend that you guys pause intermittently, look up some of these tracks. Usually they're pretty easy to find. If you type in the title of the song and the artist, you'll find at least some variation of the song that you can hear. So let's focus first on the teen idols. Okay. So we have talked about this a little bit the other day, or today, I guess. So this is a new day. So teen idols of the early 1960s. Now, one of the complaints people have about music is, and this has been a long time thing, is that studios and engineers are building these bands or artists for the sake of making sales because of like the sex appeal or attractiveness of an individual, and the music doesn't necessarily have that, you know, deep creativity that a lot of people look for in music. That authenticity, I guess, is a way of saying it. And unfortunately, like the teen idols were not exempt from this. After Elvis, we talked about, went into the army and kind of put a hiatus on his career. A lot of studios were looking for a new Elvis to kind of come on. So one of the avenues that they chose to follow after is using what were called teen idols. Now, as you can see from this Frankie Avalon here on the right, these were young men who kind of had chiseled features, pristine haircuts, kind of those dreamy eyes. They were supposed to appeal to um, preteen or teenage girls. Um, Now, these young men typically were supposed to be seen as not dangerous. They weren't a threat. Elvis Presley kind of had that threatening ideal, like his waving hips and his sex appeal were not appropriate for young girls, apparently. So parents didn't necessarily like that. But the preteens were kind of the ideal boyfriend, that non-threatening. I'm going to take you to the sock hop, and we'll get you a soda after the end, and then I'll walk you home and kiss your hand goodnight. um, so ideally, well, no pun intended, most of these young men were brought on because of their looks, and unfortunately their vocal capacity was secondary. And if you go through deep catalogs of this, you can see that there's probably some truth to that. But to be fair, not every individual who was brought on as a teen idol um, were not untalented. A lot of them were quite talented and had beautiful voices. um, this is from the Partridge Family. That's a more 70s variation. So these young men were designed to appeal to young girls' fantasies. So singing these love songs um, about longing, or missing you, or just things like that, were meant to feel like it was being sung to them through their record players. So again, their handsomeness, clean cut, this non-threatening, just had this polite romanticism about them. Okay. Now, Elvis actually kind of rejoined the music scene after his time in the army, and had, a pretty successful career. I don't know that he would say it was the sort of career that he wanted. I think he kind of had a sad musical existence after his initial success. Um, but as a teen idol, he kind of abandoned his earlier, you know, rock and roll mentality that he put out at first. I mean, maybe not completely, but I can tell a difference between his earlier songs versus his latter songs from post the army. Um, so this example, "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" You know, it's a good song. I think it's one that's worth listening to. I think listening to his whole catalog is worth listening to. He just has a beautiful voice. Um, but in some ways, it didn't necessarily carry that same edginess or that rock and rollness that I come to look for in Elvis and his earlier stuff. Like, it's not All Right Mama to me. But again, it's a beautiful song, but you can see this kind of shift into this teen idleness. So this is kind of a soft romantic hit. If you want to pause and listen to some of it, I recommend that. All right. Another teen idol who was quite popular during this time was Frankie Avalon. Um, Started off as a singer, had a pretty successful acting career. He was managed by Bob Marchucci at Chancellor Records. Some of his big hits, again, you might pause here again and listen to some of these, are Venus and Why, which he did in 1959. Um, this is him on the right. He did transition into acting. This is Annette Funcello. She is also actually quite a phenomenal singer. Um, they did a movie together called Beach Blanket Bingo. Now, I had never seen this before, so I watched it last night. Um, it is incredibly cheesy, but it kind of has this ideal look at like what the early 1960s might have appeared to a lot of people. So, it takes place on a beach. Everyone is wearing kind of portable radios with earbuds, and they're dancing, um, and just kind of silly plot, misogynistic aspects in there. Um, but just kind of a silly, not a great plotted movie. But I can also see why this sort of movie would appeal to teenagers. And there was a lot of instances where, you know, Frankie and Annette would sing duets together and sing their own songs, and other, musicians would come on and sing. So, you know, there's that aspect. So I think it might be worth a watch, or at least a look. You might actually at least check out Beach Blanket Bingo, the song. Um, it's kind of again, one of those cheesy teen idol ones, that, like playing a game and making sure you end up with the right person. Okay, Fabian. Okay, you take a look at this guy. Just chiseled features, slicked back hair, has that little curl in the front. Okay. Um, so he was also managed by Bob Marchucci. He was a teen idol. Again, he was known for his looks more than his voice. But he had a couple hits. One was "Turn Me Loose" and one was "Tiger." Um, again, not great vocal capacity. Like, I mean, again, it's fine, but he might be one that you can check out a little bit. But again, I have I think one of these is, I think, "Tiger" or "Turn to Me" is a live recording, so you can see him perform live. Bobby V. Okay, another one. Um, he was from North Dakota. He recorded with Liberty Records in Los Angeles. So you have a lot of these different record companies who are trying to find, this next Elvis who's going to catch on. Um, he was quite talented. He had a big hit called "Take Good Care of My Baby" in 1961. Um, he also had several a pretty long career, I think. So he had some other hits, but "Taking Care of My Baby" is his one of his main ones that you might again check out. Okay, Bobby Vinton. Okay, he was signed by Epic Records. He was very big into romantic ballads, which maybe isn't surprising. Um, he had a hit, "Roses Are Red, My Love." This actually went to number one, and he had a similar string of songs after that that did quite well. Um, Again, he was a heartthrob for many teenage girls. He came across as very tender, had kind of this romantic look about him. Okay, Bobby Darin. Okay, um, quite a talented performer. Actually, a lot of his songs I think are quite enjoyable, and they kind of go. They don't feel so ballady, all of them, to me. I think he has a little more versatility and uh, a couple more options to enjoy. Um, I would listen to Splish Splash. That if of all these teen idol songs that I'm presenting to you guys to look at, this probably is one that you would know, or at least most likely be familiar with. Um, I have a live version of this one. It's kind of silly, that you can pause and check out. He did "Dream Lover," "Mac the Knife," which is a phenomenal song. Okay, so again, like as a review here, teen idols not signed for their musical ability. They were signed for their sellability. You know, the idea that teenage girls will look at these and want to put up a poster of these guys on their walls and buy their records, okay, and then daydream about them singing it to them. So, like I said, many of these guys had genuine talent. Others, again, the focus was more on their looks. And unfortunately, as we all age, our looks kind of diminish after that. So, some of them did not have the long careers as other ones might have. Okay. Again, some of them were quite successful. Some sold millions of records. Okay. So, teen idols again became popular on the big screen. I already talked about Beach Blanket Bingo. So Frankie Avalon, Annette Funtello. Okay. So again, that one, if you have any inclination, you could check out. Okay. Um, I would say the teen idols did not have like a super long stint in rock and roll. Maybe a couple years, late 50s, early 60s, just a couple years that you kind of had this influx of artists like this. Okay. Um, but they did have their influence. They actually, I think, had some inspiration or provided some inspiration for musicians like the Beatles and perhaps the Rolling Stones. Okay. There is some discussion questions, but I will let you guys kind of think of these on your own and look into your packet. Um, the next one that I would like to look at with you guys is the rise of the record producer. Okay. Now, when we talk about record producers, um, there were engineers and people who would bring on musicians, but a record producer is someone who has a little bit different of a job. These had the name A&R men, okay? And what that stood for is artists and repertoire, okay? This is one who works in the music industry. They actually hunt around to find new artists. So a lot of these were the men who, or women, yeah, mostly men who were looking for artists for like the teen idols, okay? Um, that they could, publish a record with. Um, they ensured that sessions stayed on schedule. They made sure that they stayed within a relative budget. So, I mean, these were important guys. Um, they didn't necessarily have as much influence over the sound of the music. It was more like the physical appearance, in some cases, bringing in, individuals for these uh, labels, etc. Um, Now, a shift in the 1960s. Producers started to take more creative control. Um, a lot of these A&R men started doing a little more work with the sound of these records. Um, and, again, with some good success. We have figures like Lieber and Stroller. These were producers, were really instrumental in crafting some phenomenal records. Okay, not just overseeing the recording, but influencing the sounds that were happening. So again, it kind of moved away from this idea. We talked about this with the wall of sound, this idea of having a band come in and do like a live performance in the studio and then putting that out as a record. Again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the idea that you could layer and do multiple things, which you maybe couldn't do all at the same time in the studio was kind of a unique thing. Okay. Um, We've already looked at some of these ones, but you can review them again. We have Lieber and the Strollers. They did work with the Coasters, who did the songs Yakety Yak and Charlie Brown. Um, so again, instead of just writing individual songs, Lieber and Stoller, for instance, started looking at records as a concept, which I think is a good thing. Sometimes you can get a song or a couple songs on an album, and there doesn't feel like, I don't know if you guys have listened to music much this way, but if you listen to an album, a lot of times it's going to fit together and, the songs all kind of belong on there. So, kind of concept albums, which we'll see coming about later. These were kind of begun by Lieber and Stoller. Um, they were involved with the songwriting, they were involved in arranging, producing, just having this cohesive sound for each record. Um, they worked with the Drifters. We talked about them again the other day. So the song "There Goes My Baby." This was again groundbreaking for the use of the wall of sound, use of strings, orchestration. Um, Carole King and Jeffrey Goffin, they were instrumental in shaping these sounds. Phenomenal writing career of these two. Um, they worked with Lieber and Stoller. Um, let's see. Carole King, for example, she had a specific idea to have a timpani part in Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? Sorry, I don't have a link on this one. Um, she did work on how it should be played. So she wasn't just writing the chords and the songs and maybe a melody. She was actually arranging, the instrumentation parts on it. Um, so again, a lot of these writers and whatnot and producers would have more control over the sound that was happening. Um, Again, we've made mention of Phil Spector. Just to give a little more insight, he was one who revolutionized the record production in what we call the wall of sound. So this is the layering of different tracks, different sounds. He actually started his career with Teddy and the Bears. Sorry, I don't have a link on this one either. Um, so Teddy and the Bears did a hit called "To Know Him Is to Love Him." So this would be two men and Teddy apparently. um, So, under Lieber and Stroller's apprenticeship, Phil Spector developed his own unique approach to recording. Okay. So, just to emphasize again, the wall of sound was a production technique. Um, it was more dense, layered sound. You would have multiple instruments blending together. You could actually control the levels on some things. So, if like the drum part was too loud, you could kind of dial that back in at parts where you didn't need it to be. Um, it was just a bigger audio experience. Like if you were listening to it in headphones, you could especially hear this difference. Okay. Um, they would use multiple instruments, multiple microphones. It would be a lot more of immersive sound. Okay. So, I mean, it was noticeable. Um, we have mentioned some of these before, the Crystal, so uh, do, da doom, run, excuse me. Again, this was written by Spector, Barry Mann, and Ellie Greenwich. The Ronettes, Be My Baby. Again, we looked at that one the other day. Um, these songs, especially, were unique in creating the wall of sound. I believe I mentioned this, but I remember Brian Wilson telling a story of how he heard this song on the radio in his car and he had to pull over just so he could listen to it. And he was just amazed by, you know, what was coming out of his speakers. And so that kind of inspired him and other artists to go and make different types of records and to implement more things than they were able to before. Um, Again, he influenced many artists. So, like I said, we had the Beatles or the Beach Boys, but also the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. He produced the Righteous Brothers, their song "You've Lost That Love and Feeling." Again, a fantastic tune. Um, yeah, he actually worked with the Beatles on their very last album in 1970, "Let It Be." Okay, I think as a conclusion, that's good. All right, to continue on, we want to pack in some of this a little bit today. We have Sweet Soul. Okay, so this is kind of where we finally get to talk about soul music a little bit more. Okay, give us a second. Okay, now soul music, again, this is another thing that came from black artists primarily. Um, so with Phil Spector, he again recorded artists black and white, which was a phenomenal thing. Um, Again, he wanted to create bigger sounds and bigger sounds than what live performances could do in the studio. Um, and soul was one of the forefront musical stylings that came out of this. So again, some of those ones that we looked at, the R&B styles of the Rossinettes, um, other soulful artists like Ray Charles did fantastic work. Sam Cooke, which we looked at the other day. Um, so again, he worked with Ronettes, the Crystals. Yeah, some of this we kind of covered already. Okay. So when we talk about sweet soul, we're going to see soul kind of revive again here later in other decades. But We call it sweet soul. This is blending of like African R&B music. We had more classical strings, maybe a few more Latin rhythms. Okay, this music felt a little bit more sophisticated, oftentimes smoother sound. We looked at some of these songs. There was a lot more of a crossover appeal. So the difference here, instead of a cover where someone would look at a black artist song and then play it, record it again with a white artist and then put it out on white radio, for instance. That didn't happen as much. This was more crossover. Um, it was able to cross over, so you'd have more black artists performing and white audiences enjoying it, okay, and being successful in the pop charts. Um, Again, this was a little more subtle, more refined, a little more compared to some of the more aggressive sound of early rock music. So there goes my baby by the Drifters, Stand by Me by Benny King, all phenomenal ones. Um, Nat King Cole and Johnny Mathis. Okay, these were earlier artists, but they were phenomenal musicians. They would sing more kind of adult romantic ballads. These ones were not maybe necessarily tailored towards uh, younger people, but again, many did like it. Um, but they would use more orchestration in the backing. Their music was sophisticated. They had more romantic themes. Um, so a great song from Nat King Cole, "Looking Back," Johnny Mathis, "Chances Are," okay, from 1958 and 1957. Okay, Sam Cooke, again, I mentioned him the other day, a great pioneer, sweet soul. He started off singing gospel and switched to pop music, but he again brought some of that soulful vocals with him, had more smooth orchestrations. Okay, um, he had some great hits in the late 1950s with "You Sent Me," and then "Another Saturday Night." Um, just phenomenal. He's one I would really implore you to please check out. Um, Lieber and Stoller, again, making mention of them. They did work on songs like "There Goes My Baby" by the Drifters. Again, this is a very pivotal moment in soulful music. Again, this is a blending of R&B, more string instruments. That's again something that we maybe think of when we imagine songs from the '60s. Um, we see this kind of coming about in like Elvis's songs. Um, I Can't Help Falling in Love with You would be something that feels a little more soul for me. Okay. All right. Benny King. He was one. He left the Drifters and he launched a successful solo career. We're going to find here, guys, that a lot of these musicians and artists are going to have some crossover. So sometimes guitarists will move to a new band or lead singers will go on a solo career. Sometimes with more or less more success or less. It just depends. But that's going to be a norm that we're going to see come up here quite a bit. Um, but Benny King, he had hits like Spanish Harlem, Stand By Me. The Drifters continued on without him. They had hits on Up on the Roof, which I think James Taylor covered at one point on Broadway. That's another one we looked at the other day. This had Rudy Lewis on lead vocals. Okay. Um, Now, a lot of people question the idea, did the British invasion, so like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, end soul success? Because it was quite successful in the United States. Um, I would say yes and no. Um, we're going to look at this a little bit more closely and have a video on this at some point. But um, there were bands like the Rossinettes, I think, had almost as many hits in some instances as the Beatles, but they're certainly not near as remembered as the Beatles. So I'd say yes, they were overshadowed by that, but also no. In some circles, they were just as successful. Okay. Um, so again, Sweet Soul kind of, it was, you're into the Beatles or you're kind of into soul. You could be both, obviously, but they were kind of appealing to different audiences. Okay. Um, so like again, Sweet Soul kind of contrasted with this raw energy that came about from these British bands. So again, I would say it was overshadowed as far as our rock and roll journey is concerned. We won't talk about it near as much after this, but it was influential. It influenced British bands, okay, as well, and then it was also influential in later music, like what came out of Motown and modern R&B. So A lot of what you look at here, guys, if you listen to some of these carefully and you're into R&B, and a modern R&B or soul music, which I would recommend, you can hear those influences. Okay. Um, yeah, Phil Spector again, phenomenal things that he was doing in the studio. Um, Influenced countless artists, made countless artists. A lot of these musicians had great success just because of the work that was done in these studios. Okay. All right. Hopefully, you guys had paused to look at some of those. And let's continue with TV, movie, and dance crazes. I'll be sorry to miss this one with you guys, but some of these ones you got to kind of look to see and to understand. So TV, movies, dance crazes in the early 1960s. Okay. Um, like we mentioned with the teen idols, a lot of these musicians were chosen for their looks rather than their ability to sing because they would be on TV. You know, uh, like we mentioned before, Elvis Presley gained massive momentum and success because he was on the Ed Sullivan Show. That was the same with the Beatles, and that's just kind of a norm that we're going to see throughout the rest of music. Even today. Okay. Um, but because of TV, we had some pre MTV, if you guys are familiar with that, TV shows that came on. Um, so we had television, we had movies, we had what were called dance crazes. Um, Examples of this would be like shows like American Bandstand. You had individuals like Elvis, obviously, and Chubby Checker, who were very influential in spreading some of these ideas. Okay, so I have some gifts here that you can kind of see. Um, Now, TV shows were very instrumental in promoting rock and roll music, especially rock and roll music that promoted new dances. Um, so again, this kind of set the platform for like music videos that we would see come later in the 1980s. Um, so a lot of times people wanted to see, these musicians perform, but also what people were dancing. You know, and a lot of times some of these songs would feature, different dance moves. If this began in Philadelphia, a show in 1952, and it went national in 1947. This is Dick Clark. Okay, he's on the right. So this is American Bandstand. Um, his focus again was on teen dancing, so we wanted to promote popular music. Oftentimes, these performances, and this happens still even today, would be done by lip sync. So you'd actually be hearing the recording because it would be too hard to do on live TV. But you'd hear the recording from a record, and then the artist would just be fake playing or fake singing, but also dancing and having other people dance around. Um, so this kind of influenced the popularity of like dances and different dance moves that people had. So I know this severely predates you guys, but like a modern example I can think of this, almost kind of modern, is like the Macarena. I think some of you probably know that dance, but that was something I think that came about when I was in elementary school. So I mean, it is quite old. Um, but I mean, other popular dances that we have seen done. Um, I think Deadpool is an example where he kind of revived the in sync dance moves. Anyways, to continue on, Dick Clark, this individual on the right, hosted the show, and he was kind of a central figure in this popular movement. Okay, um, I think he did at least initially a decent job of being friendly with teens, um, you know, showing, having them having a good time, but also being not beyond what parents would deem as acceptable. I thought he had a good balance of that. If you ever get a chance, you can maybe check out some of his hosting or shows. He was instrumental in popularizing rock, just like several other individuals we talked about, but for the TV. This really made it to mainstream audiences. Like we said, he started in 52, um, a local TV station, and it became so popular it was a nationwide show. Um, it Because of this, it really shaped the industry of how people did music. So like we like I mentioned here, live performances on variety shows like the Ed Sullivan Show. That's him on the right with the Beatles. Okay, um, brought major rock acts to national attention. So people, seeing the Beatles, that was kind of their big break in America. Okay, in part, anyways. So Elvis Presley, like we mentioned several times before, made it big from being on TV. The Beatles, Jerry Lee Lewis, the same thing. Okay, and a lot of people, Ed Sullivan was like Conan O'Brien or, um, gosh, I lost it. Well, you get the idea. Um, but Ed Sullivan Show was the show in the 1950s and 60s. Okay. Um, Ricky Nelson, he was actually an interesting individual. He started off as a TV star. He was on a show called Ozzie and Harriet. There's a image from the show. Um, Actually, this launched his music career. He was again kind of a teen idol, but he went about more kind of the rockabilly sound. Um, and his music was again quite successful among teens and parents. Um, so he is a great example of how TV could be used to promote artists. We see this a lot of times: actors turn musician or musicians turn actors, and a lot of this has to do with the visual aspect. Some of his main songs that were quite good were "Traveling Man," "Hello Mary Lou." I love that song; it's so good. Um, and again, these were hits thanks to his performances on Ozzy and Harriet. Um, Now, like I mentioned before, we're going to talk a little bit more about Elvis. Like I said, he kind of had, in some ways, his career really blew up after, going into the late 1950s after his, success as a musician. He ended up being a movie star and did several movies. Um, some are okay. A lot of them are pretty horrible. But you can always depend that he would do a song and sing and perform. And by horrible, I mean not him so much as like the plot themselves. And Elvis was not unaware of this. I think he would have very much preferred not to have done all these movies in some instances. um, so again, not all his movies are critically acclaimed, but it did keep him in the public eye. A lot of people would go see a movie because Elvis was in it. So again, he kind of moved away from that rebellious rock star to this mainstream entertainer. And again, like I said, some of these are phenomenal, and have some good songs. Jailhouse Rock. Um, I think we watched a little bit of that at some point, but phenomenal kind of music video that happens in that. Blue Hawaii is quite good. And then Viva Las Vegas. That one you still hear anytime you go to Vegas. But again, so like I said, not all of them are horrible, and so you had some great songs come out of it, but some of the plotting are not the best. Other teen movies, again, I know I've kind of beat this one over the head, but like Beach, okay, that Beach Party was the one I forgot the name of. This one was done 1963. There we go. And then Beach Blanket Bingo, the other one I watched, was from 1965. Also, this both of these movies feature Frankie Avalon and Annette Funcho, Funcello, excuse me. Okay. They incorporated a lot of what we would call surf music. That a lot of these took place on the beach. Okay. I mentioned before they kind of have this Archie aspect to it. I know in the Beach Blanket Bingo one that I watched, they had a character and they're named Bonehead. In the Archie comics, there's a character named Jughead, and he was, as you can imagine, a bonehead and an idiot, but kind of a lovable character. Um, but mostly these songs were a vehicle to promote these songs. So just like Blackboard Jungle with Rock Around the Clock made that song successful, these movies were made, like I said, kind of weak plots, but kind of to bring in the forefront this music of these different artists, and more life. It was a success, and this was not something that was abandoned by other artists. The Beatles, for instance, did A Hard Day's Night, a movie which featured their hit single "A Hard Day's Night." So Chubby Checkers. Okay, he is an individual who did the song in 1960s "Twist," and also came up with the dance moves, which you can see kind of in that GIF on the right there. This sparked what we said a national dance crave that transcended the teen market. Okay, so American Bandstand, major role in promoting these famous dances, and teens and adults would watch these and then join these dances. And so when they'd go to the high school dances or a dance in some club and the twist came on, they would know how to do the dance. Not overly complicated. Um, Again, nothing overly provocative in that one. Okay. Um, and Chubby Checkhurst's song "The Twist" topped the charts in the 1960 and in 1962. Other dance crazes that kind of came from this. We talked about the locomotion, so everybody's doing a brand new sound now. Come on, baby, do the locomotion. There was a dance with that. Other ones that you might see were like the mashed potato. Um, I don't know how that dance was. Oh, there we go. Yeah, the mashed potato, the what to see. These were dances that became popular in American Bandstand. I think that one gif on the right is the mashed potato. Um, so again, the focus in this case was not about the music so much as it was about the dancing. There are some songs that are kind of stupid, but the dance moves that go with it kind of give them those longevity. I don't know that I've ever been to a church dance or a school dance that we didn't play. Um, I think it's called the Funky Chicken, um, and it's a dance move that I don't forget. You also do that one. Everybody, clap your hands. Those are just dance moves that people kind of come to expect in these things. And again, this started with these dance crazes in the 1960s. I don't know that anyone really does a twist anymore and knows the mashed potato, but you get the idea. Um, so these laid the trends for future musical stylings, like we see with disco. We're going to actually talk about that a little bit. So if you are a hater of disco, sorry, we're going to go over it a little bit. Okay. And again, a lot of it dealt more with the focus on the dance and the beat, and that mattered more than the song itself. And again, we see that still more today. A lot of um, music that is popular kind of gets like a dance rendition, and I don't always like those. But again, they're more made for people to still kind of like those songs but be able to dance to them. So, okay. Hopefully, you guys will check out some of those. I will make sure that those have those links, hopefully. Um, we will save the rest of this tomorrow. But you guys, thank you so much for being attentive and following along in this. And yeah, if you guys have questions, you can certainly ask me. But that's all I have for you today.